Alright, YouTube, it's time for Occult Literature video number 76 on Archaic rock inscriptions. This is another one of the supposed Hargrave works, Jennings Hargrave, sort of plagiarist slash author of the era, late 1800s, that goes along with Cultus Arborum, Ophiolatreia, nature worship, and so forth. Most of these, roughly 120 to 150 page manuscripts. They were bundled together later, they were released individually first. Still got, I think, 4 of them to edit. I'm editing Nature Worship as we speak. A good work. As far as Archaic rock inscriptions goes, it's a little bit closer to phallism than Cultus Arborum or Ophiolatreia. I'll get into the actual content, though, in a moment. Link, as always, to the Amazon page where you can purchase my edition of this work off of Amazon. Second link to my books blog. There are 4 links on the left-hand side if you're into alchemy, folk magic, spiritual works, grimoires. Those tabs are there. On the right-hand side are works that I myself have authored. Some of those still have to be re-edited. I'm using a totally new style of format now. It's far superior to the old one. I have to go back through like 3 dozen old works and bring them up to speed, but it's all good. They're already acceptable in their current form, even the older works. It's just that I've become a little bit of a stickler for format, I will say. Archaic rock inscriptions is 130 pages of material, and it's a really good material. It's more interesting than phallism. It's at least as interesting as Ophiolatreia or Cultus Arborum. It's actually well written. You've got to keep in mind, with these works that are linked possibly to Hargrave, most of the content is secondary sources and very long quotes. And so it's not really so much, it's more a compilation of other people's lore on a subject from science or from a mystic perspective than it is primary source material written by whoever was the author slash editor of the work itself in its entirety. These were privately printed at the time. They were considered impolite material because they dealt with penis worship and vagina worship and a bunch of savages worshipping snakes and rocks and things like that, and describing them in somewhat eugenic, grotesque terms, I will say. For instance, you see the term in this work and elsewhere, half-civilized, for people who weren't outright savages wearing bones in their noses, but didn't build empires or work with bronze, at least, or something like that. They were semi-civilized people. The Mesoamericans here are identified as semi-civilized, or the Irish, interestingly enough, as semi-civilized people in antiquity, as opposed to the Britons and some of these other groups of the Romans. They were fully civilized at their time. Archaic rock inscriptions deals specifically with the phallic component, or possible phallic component. The work does admit that it's only a possibility, of certain engravings that are found scattered around the British Isles, especially in Northumberland, scattered around the central states, the plain states in the United States of America, Brazil as well, Ireland certainly to a great extent, India and elsewhere. Cup markings. And these markings essentially are nothing more than a little sort of chiseled channel and then 1 or 2 different rings towards the end. And various theories exist as to the function of these little markings. Some of the anecdotes in this work suggest they're literally nothing more than decoration. They just look good. They had no purpose. Others said they were sacrificial. The little channel going out of the sort of center hole or center cup, the gutter, was meant to drain off fluid, perhaps blood from a sacrifice, perhaps wax from a candle, not exactly sure. Some of these figures were painted over with ochre, some of them were quite plain, some of them were more machined looking, others were obviously older. Maybe they were used for fermentation in some of these cases, they claim. Others said astronomy. Some said they were mostly Roman in origin. Some said that they were native in the British Isles to the people that were already there. Others said it was evidence of some sort of overarching general cult that was around the entire world, either spawned in a singular location or spawned in multiple locations by coincidence because phallic worship or astronomy simply happened to be in vogue among ancient man. It doesn't make a final conclusion, but it does suggest that in general, the editor, whether Hargrave, Jennings, or whoever else, is of the opinion that largely it points to phallic worship. That is, that this is literally a lingam and a yoni. It's the same as the Shiva lingam in Hindu culture, which is a little sort of stone phallus that you put in a little cup or indentation, and it's literally a penis and vagina. In the most strict sense, the mythology actually alludes to this being literally a lingam, literally a phallus. It's sort of a pictorial representation of that minus the actual sort of phallus itself. And I happen to, I'll say this as a personal aside, I happen to agree that this is the most probable sort of cause of these actual inscriptions. They still exist today. The petroglyphs have these little sort of cup and channel markings all over the place. They're all over. Whether you're talking about sort of the mound building region of the Americas, certainly India, certainly the British Isles, or even in Romandom in the Mediterranean basin. They're everywhere. I believe they've been found in the Etruscan sort of layer in Tuscany as well. So it's quite old and goes back, we're talking pre-Egyptian times, certainly. Now, these works are hampered slightly by the fact that in the late 1800s, very little was known about Samaria. And very little was known, the human timeline was different. Egypt was sort of the dawn of the first human culture, and then into Persia and then the Chaldeans and so forth. They didn't really know that much about Samaria. They thought apparently some of these remains were just Babylonian remains or something and came later. And so you have to keep that in mind. But this work is more geared towards archaeology, as opposed to Cultus Arborum and Ophiolatreia especially, which are more just history, not the physical remains, but the literary history of some ancient cultures paired with anthropology in the social sense. This is more anthropology in the archaeological sense. If you're interested in archaeology, this work is probably of greater interest than Cultus Arborum, Ophiolatreia, or Phallism, which is really an ethnographic work of sorts when you think about it. It really has nothing to do with archaeology. This work, though, deals specifically and almost entirely with physical remains, which sets it apart from the other works on the subject by, again, Hargrave, Jennings, or whoever else was responsible for them. Very good work, again, 130 pages long, so a fairly good amount of material there, mostly secondary in form. So again, link in the description to the Amazon page where you can purchase my edition of this work. Again, it's going to be the cheapest edition there. It's also well made, properly formatted by hand, not a facsimile. Always important, bears mention. Second link to my books blog as well. That's about all. Peace out.